This is Dr. Izad, and this is another impromptu video in which I am outlining the skills associated with writing a literary analysis essay. In the previous videos, I've gone over specifically the specific standards that pertain to writing explanatory essays, which is the essay type that literary analysis will fall under. That's the type of writing that you're doing. So you could check those videos out if you want to see how skills are applied with respect to the specific language that is used in those standards for New Jersey, for New Jersey State. In this video, I'll be revisiting some of those skills, but I'm not going to go over the actual verbiage of those skills. So if you're one of my students watching this, we've gone over these skills before, and I'm just going to go over them again, skills that are involved in all the different paragraphs, whether that be the conclusion, the body paragraphs, or the intro. And if you're a teacher that happens to come across this video, if you're a fellow teacher, you might just want to pay attention to how the way I teach writing these essays, it promotes higher order thinking because I emphasize the fact that there's no one way to write this, and this is important for the students to realize as well. There's no algorithmic thing that you do whenever you're writing an essay, but there are certain functions that your introductory paragraph and body paragraphs should carry out, and you're going to have to apply certain skills in order to for your paragraphs to fulfill those functions. So like there are any number of ways that you could communicate your ideas, but there are specific things that each paragraph should do in order to effectively communicate them. So let's look at the prompt again. And the prompt is saying use what you have learned from reading Acts 1 and 2 of Macbeth to write an essay describing how characters' interactions create conflict. And then it goes on to ask how does the Porter's speech help to develop the theme that will be learned from this conflict. So essentially, it's saying like what theme is developed and how does the Porter's speech, how might it really make this theme apparent or obvious? How does it help to develop that theme along with the conflict that's created through the characters' interactions? So what you want to do in the introductory paragraph is you want to introduce all the different topics that you're talking about. And the first thing that so in order to do that, to introduce them properly, you'll have to give background information on them and also explain how all of them connect to one another because you're going to be talking about at least several different topics. You're going to bring up several different topics, and you don't want it to sound random. You need to make it clear for your reader how all of these topics connect. So I'm just going to go over the first paragraph. When I say Macbeth is a harrowing tale of a hubris that results from being drunk off of ambition, Macbeth is one of the topics in this prompt. And if you'll remember, uh, if you're in my class, we came up with 5 topics. So Macbeth is one topic. Characters' interactions is another topic. These are all different things that we're talking about. Conflict is another topic. The Porter's speech is another topic, and then theme is another topic. So I start off with Macbeth, and I give background information on Macbeth. I'm telling you what it is about very generally. That's another thing that you want to keep in mind for the intro. They usually begin speaking about things very generally and they gradually become more specific. You don't want to get into the specifics too quickly or right away. And then I go on to say throughout the course of the play, characters interact in such ways that cause others to be consumed by their ambition, thereby creating conflict. So I relate it to the play because Macbeth, I relate it to that topic because I'm saying that this is something that happens throughout Macbeth, throughout this topic. And then I say characters' interactions. Those are things that you'll see throughout Macbeth, and what you'll see is them causing conflict. So the characters' interactions cause conflict. That is how they relate, and the character interactions causing conflict is something that you'll see in Macbeth. That is how those things relate. Then I give more background information on those characters' interactions and the conflict. So I say examples of these interactions include the witch's dialogue, and then Lady Macbeth attacking Macbeth's masculinity, and then I get into a little bit of what the conflict is. It drives him to commit heinous actions. In the case of Macbeth, it's murdering King Duncan. and then I give a brief answer to the question that is to be elaborated on in the body paragraphs. Or proven in the body paragraphs, and that is what is called the thesis statement. So I'm saying, so remember the question is asking how does the Porter's speech work together with the character interactions and the conflict to really emphasize what the theme of the narrative is. So I say these actions, the characters' interactions, and in tandem with the Porter's speech, so I connect characters' interactions to Porter's speech because I say when you consider them together, right, about the effects of alcohol work together to develop the theme that being too ambitious can be one's downfall. So I connect the topic of theme also to the Porter's speech and the actions of the characters or the interactions of the characters because I say that these things are the theme is developed by both of these things, these topics that we're discussing. Now, when you're going into the body paragraph is supposed to, again, elaborate on and or provide proof for your thesis statements. So you're proving this or elaborating on it somehow in the body paragraphs. So what you want to do to transition is you're going to want to either restate what your thesis is or have like a subclaim that's drawn from your thesis. So you're either going to take a part of your thesis statement or and elaborate on that, or you're going to provide it like because your thesis statement should be a general answer to the overall question, so you could also get into the more specifics. So that's what you want to start off with, and in this thesis statement, and sometimes it might not. You might not even want to just elaborate on the thesis statement. You might have to elaborate on other things that you said in the introductory paragraph, which might relate to your thesis statement. So, I start off mine by talking about the seeds of ambition that were planted in Macbeth's mind. So, this is one of the actions that I referenced previously in my opening paragraph because I say the witch's dialogue is something that creates conflict, and that is one of the questions that's being answered. That's the first question that's being asked that you have to answer. How do characters' interactions create conflict? So I'm addressing that part, and I do reference that part in my thesis statement. So I'm elaborating on this, and I'm proving how the characters' interactions that I cited here how they create conflict. And I'm starting off with the witch's dialogue. So I and it also relates to my theme because the theme is that being too ambitious can be one's downfall. And remember, relating new topics that you're mentioning or relating new sentences in other paragraphs to what you said previously, that is something that you should be doing throughout. So I begin by saying that seeds of ambition are first planted in Macbeth's mind when he encounters the three witches in the first act. So after you have that subclaim, which is a small part of my overall claim right over here. I'm talking about the actions that are creating conflicts to develop the theme. And so after you provide the subclaim or you restate that part of your claim, what you want to do is you want to provide text evidence that either exemplifies what you're saying here or proves what you're saying here. So I have text evidence that both exemplifies and proves because I not only provide the example of what they said to provide not only do I give an example of what they said to plant the seeds of ambition into Macbeth's head, I also sort of provide a quote that gets into how they were able to do that. So I say, upon approaching the witches, the three witches they could proclaim, and talk about how they hail him for being king. And then after you have your text support, what you want to do is you want to either like elaborate on it. You could provide context for it, explain what is happening, or relate it back to your subclaim. So those are all different ways that you could elaborate on it. You could do either or a combination of all of those things. So here I'd say here the witches present Macbeth with a prophecy that he will be king. And so I'm like sort of summarizing what's going on here and providing context. When I say this is the initial event that spurs the conflict of this play, then I explain how that creates conflict for him. Um, because it's because he then tells his wife afterwards, and then his wife also is consumed with the thought of attaining such royal grandeur, so she becomes consumed with her own ambition, and then she creates this plan to make Macbeth king faster, which I say right over there. And then I say what the plan is, and in the sentence, I also create a transition to my next paragraph. Again, remember, you always want to connect all the things that you're saying. So, when you're ending a paragraph or when you're starting a new paragraph, you want to have some type of transition, either relating what you're saying here to what you're going to say later on, or starting this next paragraph with something that indicates the relationship between what you're saying here and what you said in the previous paragraph. But you see, I set up the transition for the next paragraph in here, at the end of this paragraph, because after explaining after explaining that this causes conflict, and actually that's more what I'm doing here. I'm giving context, and I provide a little bit more analysis in the next paragraph, but I'm mainly giving context, explaining what's happening, and giving context for this particular quote here. So in the next paragraph, because I say end this by saying this plan is involves killing King Duncan, and this would conflict with their respective natures, so it would go against how they naturally are as people. Then I go into the next paragraph where I sort of allude back to this statement by saying the fact that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are both ignoring their natural proclivities that would render them unable to commit such a horrific act of murder is indicative of the fact that they are blinded by the ambition that consumes them. This next paragraph is another subclaim. So it's a more specific version of the original claim that I had made in my thesis statement. Again, because I'm expounding on how the conflicts, how the interactions of the characters rather are creating conflict that is going to be developing this theme about ambition. So I say one of the characters' interactions, what they're doing specifically, is that they're ignoring their natural proclivities. So they're the natural way that they are, and the natural way that they are would make them unable to commit murder, at least without feeling guiltless about it. So, and then I say that this is indicative of the fact that they are blinded by the ambition that consumes them. So it's the ambition that's blinding them to their true natures that won't allow them to actually get away with this murder. So then I give an example. I say, for instance, when Macbeth wrestles with himself about the pros and cons of carrying out the murder, he invokes the natural camaraderie that accompanies kinship and the duties of a host. So over here, I'm basically, again, still elaborating on this answer. I mean, when you're doing that, you don't have to um, do that like your subclaim. It doesn't have to just be in one sentence. You could elaborate a little bit on it, a little bit more on it in the second sentence. And I'm also providing context, background information for my text support. And again, providing background information when necessary, along with connecting topics, is something that you should be doing not only exclusively in your intro, but throughout your essay as well. So I then go on to bring up the text support. I say in his soliloquy, which is a speech that he gives by himself, he professes, meaning he states, Then I have the quote, he's here in double trust, first as I'm his kinsman and his subject, both strong against the deed, and then as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door. So after this, I tell you what that quote means. So I'm saying that he's bringing up the fact that he's his kinsman, they're like relatives, and he's a subject, so he's someone that lives in his kingdom. So because of that, he's naturally bound by blood and duty not to wrong the king. These are natural um, roles or qualities that one would have as a relative or a host. As a relative or a host, your natural quality is to be either loving or hospitable, and a natural duty that you have is to not wrong your relatives or harm your guest. So after that, I still provide not some context. I still explain what the quote means. So I talk about him being his host. So the first two things, actually, rather that I was saying over here were, what I talk about over here is in reference to him saying that he's his kinsman and his subject, not his host. I didn't get there yet. I get there in this sentence where I say, moreover, as one who has invited him to his house as a guest, his natural and duty bound role should be to protect the king. Yes, his ambition is making him contradict those roles that he ought to naturally carry out. So he knows what he should do naturally as his host, which is to protect him and make sure no harm comes to him as a guest. But his ambition is sort of blinding him to the fact that he knows that that's the role that he should fill out, that that's a natural role that he has as his host, and his ambition is making him go against what he knows in his heart to be true, and what, it's also urging him to go against his nature because as a person he would naturally want to fulfill his roles, not do something to defy any of those roles. And then I state all of that over here in this last sentence. And notice how there's no transition to the next paragraph. I just create my transition in the first word for this paragraph by saying similarly, because I'm indicating that Lady Macbeth's conflict is kind of similar to Macbeth's, because just like Macbeth, his ambition is making him ignore his role as a host and a relative of the king's. She's ignoring her role as a nurturer, being that she is a woman. So, according to some of the dialogue that she has, she indicates that she naturally should be somebody that would work to create and protect life, not destroy it. And I provide so. I then go on to provide context to introduce that quote, where she mentions all of those things, because she says this when Macbeth has misgivings about killing the king. So I give some background information about the quote that I'm about to introduce that proves this before I actually introduce the quote. And then I introduce the quote. She states, I have given suck. I know how tender it is to love the babe that milks me. I would, while I was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out. So I then um, provide an analysis of this and also an explanation at the same time. Um, because my explanation is right over here. I say that she's killing a child, but I also I relate it back to um, my original claim, all at the same time. So I tell you like what she meant by this quote and what it was intended to do. It was she's basically taking her feminine nature and then um, she's sort of allowing you and Macbeth to view this side by side with something that she says that she would have been able to do, which was kill a child, which would make her more manly, and that this is intended to go to Macbeth, is intended to make him want to kill the king. But at the same time, I say that while she's doing this, she acknowledges a truth that she wants to ignore. She's willfully trying to ignore this truth, but she acknowledges it here. And then I say what the truth is, and that's that she refuses to honor that by she the truth that she refuses to honor is that by her very nature as a woman, because she has the natural mechanisms right over here when she refers to breastfeeding, because she has the natural mechanism to sustain life as well as create a life, because she's the one that would give birth to her son, whom she or daughter, whom she would later on feed. Because she mentions that she's acknowledging that as a her because that as a woman, it is in her nature to give and sustain life, not take it away. And this is how she's. So again, I relate this back to my original claim. I end the paragraph by relating this back to my original claim, uh, explaining how the text evidence proves that she is, all this text evidence here proves that she is ignoring her natural role as a nurturer, given that she's a woman. And then I add another sentence, also just emphasizing that, and I say that it will lead to her downfall because it's her ambition that's blinding her to this. So I make that clear. So I continue to relate it back to what I said up here. Um, And again, remember, that's what you're doing after you introduce your tech support. You have to expound on it by either explaining what it means, and or relating it back to your claim, explaining how it either exemplifies or proves whatever your subclaim was. Okay, then I go on to talk about the Porter's speech. And I have another subclaim because now I'm addressing the part of my answer where I say that the Porter's speech works together with the conflict to develop this theme. And I say explicitly how, because I say that what it is that parallels Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Well, I say it works together. I indicate how it works together with Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's conflicts because it parallels it, and I provide some context for what the speech is, and it's about the pitfalls of drinking alcohol. So the pitfalls of drinking alcohol sort of parallels the conflicts that I was mentioning that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth had. So again, I'm relating it. So I'm providing another subclaim and also relating it back to my original claims because I have to make sure, again, that the reader knows how they're all related. So then I provide my text evidence once more. All right, then over here I'm explaining what the text evidence means. So he's suggesting that alcohol, it makes people want to do unsavory things, but at the same time, it prevents them from physically acting upon those things because you get clumsy and you stumble. And then I mentioned that the effects of alcohol, even though you're like stumbling or whatever, it would cause one to ignore the fact that they're probably not capable of doing whatever it is they want to do. And then I draw the connection back to um, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's conflict. So I'm explaining how this text evidence, so not only am I explaining what he means, but over here I relate it back to the theme because I say exactly how it parallels. So I say, just as alcohol, as described by the porter, can make one want to do and drive them to do something that they would be incapable of doing, and it would eventually result in failure. That's the same. That's the same case with Macbeth and Lady Macbeth in their endeavors, because they're going to result in failure because they're going to be blind to the fact because they're so drunk, figuratively, off of their ambition that they are going to fail in their plans ultimately. So again, I explain how the text evidence proves this subclaim. And that's you always want to relate your text evidence back to your subclaim. Either give an explanation of how it provides an example of what you're saying or proves whatever it is that you're saying. And then for the conclusion, what you want to do is just recapitulate all your points. Just in very brief terms, explain how you proved your points, and then leave the reader with something to think about at the end. Some final thoughts that you want the reader to take away. Maybe provide in this case, because We're talking about the development of a theme. Maybe you want to provide about like some type of commentary about the implications of the theme, or elaborate on the theme somehow, and you'll see how I do that. So I first started off indicating that I'm going to sum everything up, and then I basically just restate what I had already said in the body paragraphs, but in a more compact way, and I just reiterate it. So, I restate my thesis, and that's that the Porter's speech parallels the conflicts of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And I state again what the theme is here. Okay, then I briefly, discuss or recapitulate what I discussed. So I say how I reiterate what the Porter said about alcohol and how he made it comparable. He compared it to, or how it was comparable, rather. He didn't compare it, but it was comparable to Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's ambition. Then I said that their ambition figuratively intoxicates them, and it blinded them to the fact that they would not be at peace after killing Duncan. And then I, again, relate it back to what the Porter says about alcohol. And these are all things that I referenced in my previous body paragraphs. And then I leave the reader with a final thought about the implications of the theme. So, if the theme is that having too much ambition can lead to one's downfall or being too consumed by your ambition, I basically make a comment on this comparison between alcohol and ambition that is present in the play, indicating that even though ambition could be a great virtue, if you have too much of it, it could poison somebody, just like alcohol could intoxicate somebody and poison them, and then it could result in bad things happening. So, if you allow ambition to poison you too much, it could be the result of your undoing. So, whereas it's not a bad thing to have ambition, I point that out. I just draw attention to the fact that one shouldn't let it consume them, because then that could end up poisoning them and things won't end up very well for them. And that is the final thought that I leave the reader with, which is something that your conclusion should do. It should leave your reader with some poignant message that they can mull over after having read your response. So, for my students, you may have to watch this video several times over and just pause it at key points. Maybe re-watch certain things just so that you could absorb everything that I said, because it is a lot to absorb. And keep in mind that this is not the way to respond to the prompt, it is just a way. This response that I provided for you is by no means perfect, and there's always room for improvement, but what I want you to focus on again is how I applied these different skills in order to fulfill the functions that an introductory body and concluding paragraph ought to fulfill. So pay attention to that. And again, if you're a teacher, that fellow teacher that happens across this video, um, do leave a like and a comment and subscribe if you found this content helpful. And there are other videos on my page that outline how to teach certain skills, some things that may seem even at times rudimentary, but frame the teaching of those skills in such a way that it still promotes higher order thinking for your students. And I also have some project-based activities that you might be interested in checking out too. So do go ahead and take a look at some of my other videos, and I will see everybody in the next one.